What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It, your movie podcast for reboots, remakes, sequels, and adaptations, and why they continue to get made. As always, I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And we're here today to talk about Universal's next attempt to revitalize one of their classic Universal monsters, monsters that we all know and love, or at least we say that we know and love. I certainly say it a lot, and then oftentimes I'm like, I have not watched a lot of these old black and white ones. I've seen a lot of them, but I do enjoy them. The Wolfman has come, following up The Invisible Man from 2019, one of the last movies before the world ended, which was the follow-up to the attempt to make the Dark Universe with Tom Cruise's The Mummy. Back when we were
Fireball
gonna MCU that nonsense,
that.
and then that did not happen. The Wolfman was what was Ryan Gosling's movie originally, and then script changes, and then director changes, and then he was like, I don't want to do it, and then COVID, and then strikes, and then here we are. Terrence, what did you think of the final product to this movie?
It's funny. I walked out the theater. I think I said it immediately to you. I don't normally advocate for a movie having an additional 15 minutes of any time. I'm like, hey, you told your story in that time. But I walked out of there saying, hey, I need 15 more minutes of the character development of these characters. Because as much as they put these people through, whatever they do with the Wolfman, which sure they use that by term, not necessarily by what I actually think the Wolfman should be. I don't care about this family. And for me, for any horror movie, you need to sort of make me care before you start putting them through their paces. But as I've gone more and more in thought about this movie, I don't know if that would have helped because the problem isn't necessarily that I don't care about the family, which is a piece of it. They have zero chemistry together. They don't feel like a family. And so I I actively don't care when he starts making his turn. And I'm like, I don't think she really likes him. Like I know we are made to believe because they're husband and wife, and that's her daughter's dad that she should care. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sad that you're changing. What am I going to do? I feel like their relationship that they give us on screen, she'd be like, well, then kill it. Let's be out of here and let's kill this dude. Like, because they have zero chemistry and zero connection. Um, it sucks because I watched Invisible Man right before I went to go see this, and like same director, same writer. So I was like, oh, we're in for a treat. And that movie, I would argue, is pitch perfect for what it is trying to do. It opens amazingly. That scene with her trying to escape is brilliant in there. It puts the version of Invisible Man into current day using domestic violence and sort of puts it on in a sci-fi package, and it works. Here, I feel like whoever thought this was the Wolfman decided to like, I'm gonna just use it in name and the idea of it, but like completely go against the antithesis of whatever Wolfman is. There should be some inner pain. We should see the Wolfman change. That's fine. But this whole movie is about that change. It's one day of him just changing from start to finish, and we sort of watch quote unquote poor body horror, but we don't really get into the psyche of it. And I think if you're going to streamline it down to where it's just this one family on screen the entire time, then I need to have more up and down, ebb and flow with him changing. Like we might need to spread this out to multiple days, do something like that. But all in all, when this was said and done, I walked out of there like, I don't care about these characters. I don't think that these people understood what the gist of what the Wolfman is. And the biggest thing about a horror movie, it wasn't scary at all, which that's a problem.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate that I see often with people have of like, well, it's a horror movie. Does that necessarily mean it has to be scary? Because there's plenty of great horror movies where I wasn't scared or like
Right.
slept easily, or, you look at things like Nosferatu or Frankenstein, or there's
Mhm.
plenty of things, but it's kind of how I feel about comedies where I'm like, no, it has to be funny. A horror movie needs to be have some sense of fear or
Dread.
dread
Hmm.
or tension. And yeah, this lacked all of that.
Right.
And I think part of that is because when you deal with a property as old as the Wolfman, as any of the Universal horror monsters, you start kind of thinking about it the way we look at superhero movies, where we know Spider-Man's origin, we know Superman's origin, we know the X-Men's origin. We don't need to see that anymore, but we do all kind of know who they are and what the rules of it are. So we know that in many of the Wolfman stories, it's the family that he doesn't attack. So I'm not terribly afraid of watching him transform in front of people that he loves, that I know he's going to have that connection with, especially when you go so heavy-handed in this idea that his daughter is a mind reader and can touch his head. And like, I was thinking I loved my daughter. You nailed it every time, which is a nice sentiment. But when you're in an hour and 40-minute movie, you don't really need to do that 100 times. Like the audience, we get it. The daughter,
Yeah.
this is their fun game they do.
Yeah, that being their bit, I need that once. You don't have to do it 3 times
Yeah.
to prove the point.
You do it once, you maybe do it again while he's sick, and then you do it one more time as the wolf, and then you're fine. And, then we have to go back to this like Wish.com Kratos in the beginning, talking to his son about how dangerous the forest is. And we see this creature, and then he's on the radio at this undisclosed period of time. So then when we get to the dad that we're following now with his daughter, so much of his agency is not scaring his daughter the way his dad scared him, and not passing on this trauma and not doing that. And they tried really hard, I think, to make that the movie, where so often, not just Wolfman, but the Universal monsters in general, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, maybe less Dracula and the Mummy, deal more with like, are they monsters? Are we the monster? It's a part of humanity. So much fun of the Wolfman and so much fear of it is this person is changing. He's a part of their community. Is he going to hurt the community, or should the community help him?
Right.
And you don't get that in this. Instead, we have to have this other Wolfman who's his dad that's now been running around these woods doing whatever in Oregon.
Which was no surprise. It should have been come as no surprise to anyone in this. I think they were trying to be like, oh, we're clever. No, it was read a mile away.
If anything, you could have cut the entire intro with the father and the son.
Just had it.
And then showed us the tattoo with the last name of the family, and done the like once his dad went in the woods and he never came back.
Yeah.
And then been like, oh, wow. And then you could have had more exposition, which this ironically really needed, because there are, we're talking of like, well, it's good in a Wolfman movie to see him change back. We want to see him change back and deal with what he's done, and see that he's a part of the family and community, and deal with the internal conflict of, should I just run away and hide? I have to keep them safe by removing myself. Even the Hulk does this, but like, we don't really understand if this guy even changes back. Like, does he, once he's the wolf, revert back to man? Or is there now just this, like, has he been running around in the woods for 30 years with the same jeans and shirt on? Because he's not even a full wolf. So like, it asks so many dumb questions, because it makes no effort to bother making the world feel real. Because like, there's a throwaway line of like, well, we don't get a lot of visitors here in Oregon. It's Oregon. It's a state in the middle of the country. You're telling me that we've either created a perimeter around these two homes that is so isolated that this Wolfman creature has been able to run around since the indigenous tribes lived there.
Right.
And yet no one really believes it's there. It's never made it to a suburb or a school or a city or
if no one's there, by that logic, the Wolfman would start stretching out. Like, I need to go where people are so I can feed or kill or do something.
And I think it's a shame when a movie as renowned, a property as renowned as the Wolfman, as any of these horror monsters, because it is such a great well. Like, whenever one of them comes up, I am like, ooh, we haven't done the Invisible Man. We haven't done a creature from the Black Lagoon. Right. And when you get one that works like the Invisible Man, and they took it in such a unique way of like, well, now it's a tech suit, and we're going to give it to a stalker. And like, what happens if this power is in the wrong hands? He is a monster. And then she gets it at the end, and you're like, ooh, that's fun. We're going to take the power back, but now she has it, and we don't know what that means in the future. And that's a very fun idea to play with. And it didn't really feel like we tried to modernize the Wolfman at all. We kind of tried to keep this urban legend and this idea that it's been happening forever, but you still have then these problems of, well, let's say this happened in the 90s, because they say 94 at one point, but I can't tell if that's an incident in 94 and then years have passed for the first family we're following. We talk about indigenous tribes. So this has been going on forever, this animal-born virus. And when you sort of look at things like, well, what would we do with that? Somebody would have found this by now. It's
Right.
Oregon. They're not in
Yeah.
some like isolated island or country. They're not even in an isolated
Like
part of
Antarctica or something
America.
like that. Yeah, like
They're
it's a populated
yeah,
place.
they're not even on like a coast. Like it's
Yeah.
surrounded by land. Like
Right.
and even if you picked part of the Midwest, like if I'm from Illinois, I would have bought if they were like, yeah, we're 3 hours outside of Chicago and there's nothing but corn. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that exists. But
Hmm.
I have no context for that because even the sign that says welcome to Oregon looks like scratched up and torn up as if the entire state is in
People have been hit
lockdown.
left, right. Like we're just in COVID, right in the middle, in the
It's
middle of the game.
so like, it's weird. And because you're doing all of this work, you're not even focused on whether or not it's scary. And then you have these like over directed moments of like,
Hmm.
ooh, the tree that they're climbing up for safety has the claw mark. So this has happened. And some shit that I like. I like the daughter and the mom in the exact same shot with the gorgeous view that him
Yeah.
and his dad had. I like the idea of like, oh, we did pass on the
Hmm.
generational trauma. We tried and as tale as old as time, what we're trying not to become, we became, and now the
We
daughter
always
is
end up
here.
being. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like that's fun to play with. The rest of your story and characters need to have cohesion, and when they don't,
Yeah.
so I don't
It
know.
feels
What's a
like a muddy
good?
mess. Because it's weird, because I like the first time that they showed us the viewpoint from him, where everything sort of just gets muted out or like muffled in sound. He can't make anything out and it's colored. They do that three times. And I'm like, all right, guys, is there a point? Like, is there this leading to something? And it doesn't. Like, there's no point for them to show it to us that many times that doesn't have a story structure other than like, hey, I'm clever enough to show you this is what it looked like on the other side.
No, it's another one where it's like, trust your audience, man. We get it. He's a wolf man. He's not
Yeah.
going to speak coherently. He sees things differently. It's fun the first time, but we're still like not doing much with it.
Yeah.
Um, so what was the last like Wolfman movie or property you enjoyed that you're like, ooh, that was it, and why aren't we getting that back in?
I like the werewolves in Paris. Both like those are sort of that's my jam. I feel like for any werewolf property to sort of work, you have to have them in a populated area. Like it has to be in some type of population. Just because just of him being becoming a fear factor for people and him having some people to sort of attack. If it's his family, to your point earlier, he's not going to attack them. And so it's just a lot of us watching his body change. And I think there's a way to sort of put him in a city, like just put him in a regular city. Hell, have him change and then they go back home. Like have him get scratched and then have him go back home and then he turns. That would have been interesting because he's doing this thing in an actual city. And we get to see him sort of go up and down. I think you have to put him in the populated area. I think this would have worked better had they sort of like they paralleled Invisible Man with like domestic violence. I think Wolfman, you could probably use some or alcoholism or some type of like sickness like that, parallel it the Wolfman sickness to the alcoholism. Because there's a whole point at the beginning of this that doesn't lead anywhere, but there's a whole point where he makes a she comes in on the phone doing her business stuff, and he's like, "Can you take that in the other room?" And it seems like, "Hey, I'm telling you, control, get in the other room with that." I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a point that sort of comes up, and we sort of see his anger build up as we go along to the point where he then starts lashing out. It goes nowhere. But I think that would have been the fun thing to sort of play with. And actually, if you did this where you put him in a city, he starts getting angrier. You start seeing him, all right, his everyday point, he's very jovial. Then he lashes out at his daughter at some point in time. And he's like, oh crap, something's wrong. Like I don't want to do this to her. Those are the things that sort of would have been an interesting, even if it's not scary, because I can argue that sometimes, even though I may not be frightened of it, there is still a tension level that sort of occurs
And yeah, I
in
mean, yeah, I don't need to have nightmares, what I mean, but
yeah,
it's
because
like, but
Invisible
make
Man
me make
at
me
its straight at
feel
its an
something.
Invisible Man at its heart isn't terrifying, but that opening sequence had me on my like, oh my God, what is
and the
happening?
and the concept is scary.
Correct.
And that's like the weird thing here is I'm like the concept of like my dad being sick is more like sad than
Right.
terrifying.
Right. Yeah.
Like um and I think that's funny because yeah, for me I go back to the 2010 Wolfman
The
that
newest.
was the yeah, Joe Johnston's R-rated fun time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that was great because it was violent, and it was like, oh shit, what if this does happen in my community, in my area? What do we do? What does everyone do? Like, how do we
Right.
either rally behind and help him or kill him quickly? It's almost like Beauty and the Beast. You almost want the
It is.
hunter that, like, you want kind of the entire town to turn.
To turn on him. Yeah.
And then, sometimes I think back, there's that old essay that's about like what the Wolfman stories were, and they aligned it more to like puberty and a permanent change that now everyone has to
Mhm.
deal with. And when you modernize that a bit, it is like, oh yeah, I suppose it would be a disease, alcoholism, anger,
Right.
how something that would affect that becomes holistic. It affects
Hmm.
everything. And the option is like, well, we either have to divorce and fire this person and get rid of them, or we have to like rehabilitate them
And try to fix
and
them, try to
manage
make them a
it.
better and right.
But it just, to me, the Wolfman needs to be not isolated. An isolated Wolfman to me already solves the conflict of what to be done.
It
It's it
absolutely does.
it solves it. It's
You're
like, oh,
right.
he's in the woods.
Oh, all right,
He's
we're
and
fine.
we
Well,
and we don't go in
we're
there.
done here.
Yeah. It's like, oh, the same way that if I know there's a wolf in the woods, I do avoid
I'm
it.
not going there.
Got it. Okay, cool. The same way that if I know there's a disease, I don't go near it. Sir, fair enough. Um, I think those are the important things, and I think that's why so much of. I'm gonna
And
wait for you. There we go. There we go. Now it's your face popped back. Um, so much of it, then I think, is also why you can smell it when this kind of comes, because you look at that for the Wolfman I mentioned, its opening weekend a decade ago was 150 or not, I'm sorry, $31 million, and its first day was 9.9 million, where this one is at like a solid 4.5 million, which is just bad. There's not really another word for it. I don't know what the budget is if we can spin that, but um,
25. It's 25
okay.
for that, which
So
is
we
still it's a Blumhouse film, so it's relatively low, but this is a higher end of their Blumhouse margin. They usually go up to 25. They were known for doing the five twos and fives. They're at 25 on this.
Yeah, and
Probably because of
they're
the Gosling attachment originally, so they still have to give him a producer credit and all that stuff.
right, and they're now eyeing 12 million once Monday's over. That
Yeah.
4.4 was day one. So it's funny because I think it's really easy to be like, there's not an interest in this brand or these monsters or whatever. And it's like, well, clearly that's incorrect, because every
Hmm.
Halloween people come back to it and we parade them in front of everything when we try to sell horror nights or whatever else. And people buy the
Yeah.
mugs and people buy the shirts and people buy the DVDs when they come back out. And we went and saw Wolfman in 2010, and we went and saw Invisible Woman in 2019. And I really think this is a situation where people can see it. They can see it coming. Like we're sort of
Yeah.
past the point of, are people going back to the theaters or not? And we know that they are, because Mufasa and Sonic do really well, and
Yeah.
other movies do
Moana's
really
killing it.
well.
Yeah.
Moana, like, you see it happen, and horror fans are usually pretty loyal. So when you don't even get them in
I was
there,
gonna say to not get a horror audience is saying something.
it really means that they saw your trailer, they saw your marketing, and they said, "Nah, we're good."
And they also
Uh,
saw, like, I know they tried to say that it wasn't an accurate one, but it pretty was pretty accurate. The Universal horror monsters reveal of the Wolfman, people were like, that looks terrible. That can't be it. And then they're like, no, that's not how it looks. And turns out pretty damn close.
Which is also like, don't, if you're going to do all this stuff to show that you think your audience is dumb, don't also lie to them. If you're going to
Right.
do half your movie doing tricks that are like, we really want them to understand that this father loves his daughter and that she loves him, which, like, I would hope so. Um, you also can't lie to them. You can't both assume that they're not clever enough to understand your movie and also assume that they're gullible enough to be like, that's not what it looks like, though.
Hmm.
They didn't show us what it actually looks like, so I think I should believe them and go see the movie to see if it's different. That's not like, what are we
No.
doing here?
Yeah.
It's a shame, because I really want good Universal horror movies. I really want a good Mummy and a good Creature from the Black Lagoon, and
I could use a Dr. Jekyll and Hyde right now. That would just be killer. Like,
and I
you
think
nailed that.
I think to make these work, you really do need to understand why they worked 100 years ago. Like, you that's why the Marvel movies worked, is they had people who looked at those characters and how they worked then and what it was about them that made sense. And then they brought them into the modern world. And it's what they did so well in Invisible Man. And it's what they just didn't seem to have the energy to do here. And it,
Yeah.
like, you really want, like, you're never going to make the Brendan Fraser mummy movie again, but I would love a good mummy adventure movie. I would love a weird creature from the Black Lagoon movie. And like, we know that monster works because Del Toro won an Oscar doing it.
Right.
So like, come on.
Yeah.
um, maybe I don't try to connect them all, although I was the one who was like, yes, all of them.
I
We've been
like
doing.
the idea of connecting them all, but because what, but once Invisible Man came out, it was so good. I'm like, all right, I'm not that upset if these are all just really well done one-offs. But because this one's not good, I'm kind of like, well, maybe we should look at that connecting it
No.
all.
And I mean, we've been crossing them over since the 30s. I mean, we did Abbott and
Yeah.
Costello ones. They've done so many fun things that I am like, it would be so cool to have a renaissance of these movies that does then lend itself to weird, like, The Lonely Island is meeting the mummy. And I would be like, yes, that is something I want today.
Yeah.
Um, it would be really exciting to kind of get that figured out. But I just, I don't know that this is it. But the nice thing about that brand is just because the Wolfman doesn't do well, there's no reason for them not to go try to make a Frankenstein or a Bride of or a Creature movie.
And I think because it is under Blumhouse and the cost isn't that, it's bad, but it's not terrible, then it's not, they'll continue to try these. They're not going to just stop these. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's the
Um,
Wolfman. They're never going to stop trying to make them because when you do it, it's awesome.
yeah.
Because when you get it right, when you're just like, hey, man, there's a wolf killing people in a city, and then he turns into like a man, and we should kind of feel bad for him. You're like, this is great.
This is
This is
awesome.
this is why we all want a Hulk movie. We want to watch people.
Right.
We want to watch a weird mix of like heady internal things that then is like, well, what's the external conflict? Oh, he can murder a town. Like,
Yeah.
great. But that's our show, everyone. We'll see you next time. You can follow us on Hollywood Already Did It at Instagram and Twitter and maybe TikTok. Who knows what's going to happen with that? Terrence runs
I
our
hope so.
YouTube page, right? Yeah. His YouTube page, Hollywood Already Did It, where he does his TV reviews and trailer reactions and all that good stuff. And we'll be back next time. And obviously, I'm at As Always Blake, and Terrence is at Terrence Tatum for our own accounts. So that's it.